Perfect. Well, we'll just go ahead and jump in. Good morning and welcome to First Cup. I'm Katie Harwood with Access Tallahassee in the Chamber. So welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. A few housekeeping things before we get started. If y'all will stay on mute for the first part of things, I've got a couple questions. If you've been on this before, you know the drill. I've got a couple questions to get Thomas going, and then definitely want to hear from all of you because that's kind of the whole point. So either put your questions in the chat function or raise your virtual Zoom hand. And then if worse comes to worse, just raise your physical hand and we'll keep an eye out for it and I'll unmute you. We do have a sponsor this morning. TrueLeave has kind of transitioned from Coffee and Connections over to First Cup and hopefully back to Coffee and Connections soon when we're all allowed to mingle in person. And Renee is here from TrueLeave this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to her for a minute so she can give us an update on what's going on over at TrueLeave.
Thank you so much. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Renee Legere, for those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet yet. And I'm a community educator with TrueLeave. TrueLeave is Florida's first and largest of the medical marijuana dispensaries. We actually opened our 46th location last weekend in Titus. And we are scheduled to continue to open. I believe that we're slated to have 70 by the end of the year. So it's really exciting. Of course, you know, during all of this COVID craziness, we've been pivoting and, you know, our business model has shifted quite a bit, you know, from mostly in-store to a lot more delivery. We're, you know, exploring curbside pickup, installing plexiglass, you know, making sure that there's masks available, not only for all of our employees, but also, you know, for patients coming in. But we've been hiring. And so that's another big thing. I know that a lot of people are kind of confused on during this time. If you know anyone looking for a job, TrueLeave is hiring all across the board. I mean, we need people in our grow in Quincy, at our processing facility in Midway, in our stores, delivering, working our call center. So if you know anybody who's looking for a job, we're also looking for temporary employees. So trueleave.com, go to the career section. And we understand that, you know, some people have been furloughed and when their jobs come back, they're going to want to go back to those jobs. And we totally understand that. The other thing that I wanted to touch on briefly is if you or if anyone you know could benefit from medical marijuana, there's definitely, the doctors are still open. They're still seeing patients. If you go to trueleave.com, on the top right, there's a find a doctor tool. And if you were to go on that, you can just put in your zip code and a whole list of doctors will pop up. So I would definitely encourage that for anybody who you think could benefit. We've heard a lot of people have been relying on their medical marijuana to kind of help with the anxiety and the unease through this time. But thank you for having me. It's good to see everybody. I hope you have a good morning. And had a happy 420. It was 420 on Monday. Way to start the week, guys.
Thank you, Renee. Who's your True Talk speaker today?
So it's actually going to be on Tuesday, and I'm excited. So if anyone is available Tuesday at noon, we're going to have True Talks we have a psychiatrist, Dr. John Murphy, is going to be joining us, and it's going to be interesting. He has a really exciting background. He actually did a lot of the clinical trials, I guess you'd say, for some of the pharmaceutical companies. I think Vyvanse was one of the ones that he had done some of the early on trials with, and so he has realized, and he's not a medical marijuana clinic per se, but he is a psychiatrist, and he's found that medical marijuana has been such a good tool for so many different, you know, whether it's depression or anxiety, whatever it may be. So he's going to talk a little bit about trauma on Tuesday and how, you know, oftentimes people think, oh, trauma, you have to have experienced, you know, something absolutely crazy that you were in, you know, you were in a burning building, but he's going to talk a little bit about how trauma can look different to all of us. And especially with this, you know, I think a lot of people have, maybe if you haven't experienced trauma in the past, you know, losing a job that you relied on, or he was kind of suggesting, he was like, you know, if there's a mother who just lost her job and now she's at home with her 3 kids all day long, losing her, he's like, that can be a little bit traumatic. So it's really interesting. It's going to be Tuesday at noon on our Facebook. And I'm excited. It's actually my 30th birthday that day. So feel free to come join me and the psychiatrist and talk about medical marijuana.
Well, a happy early birthday. And thank y'all so much for your support of this and of the chamber. Well, without further ado, we'll jump right in. Thomas, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I know you have a busy schedule. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody who may not know you?
Okay, well, thanks for having me. I'm Thomas Whitley. I'm the Chief of Staff for Mayor Daley. I can say more, but that's really how most people know me, and most people care who I am these days. So, except for we do have a 13-month-old, so I've quickly transitioned to becoming Davis's dad, which is a pretty good way to be known as well.
First one.
Yes.
Are you just loving it?
Yeah, it's good. He's great. It's a lot of fun. We waited a little bit longer than some other people did for a number of reasons, not least of which was that I was in school for a very long time. And it's been really good. It's been good in some ways that, a lot of days I think I'm glad that we waited, and then other days I think it would have been nice if I were 10 years younger doing this right now.
So you're a doctor. You were in school.
Yeah, but not a real doctor.
You're a doctor of music?
No, my PhD is in religion.
Oh, I don't know where I got music.
So, but I'll take that too. We can just, give me an honorary doctorate of music.
So, and you graduated from Florida State.
Yes.
So, how are you using your doctorate in religion at the mayor's office?
That's a good question. On the one hand, I think it makes me either the best or the worst dinner table conversationalist, because pretty much all I talk about is religion and politics, which it is fun. But so obviously, so what I studied early Christianity, and mostly, it really, when you do a PhD, you have to get extremely specific and then down in the minutia. But the kind of overarching aspects of what I studied was identity formation. So how groups and individuals form and maintain identities. I think that's very relevant to the world that I'm in now. I think it's relevant to probably what all of us are doing. It's really important to have a grasp of how people kind of build their own identity, the meaning that goes into that, the meaning making process, and then how we work to kind of categorize and identify others. I do think that's particularly relevant. And then obviously the research aspect comes in very handy. I do a different type of research now with kind of public policy development, but having just the basic research skills is very helpful. But yeah, I certainly didn't do a PhD in religion thinking that I would end up where I am now.
It sounds like it fits pretty well, though. You've got your spiel down. I was a history major,
thanks.
and everyone always asks me how that's working out for me. So I've got to make something up on the fly. But yours actually is very believable. And
well, I think so. I spent a lot of time in higher ed, and spent a lot of time talking with. I did a lot of work with graduate students in the humanities for a long time, and kind of forcing the question for them. And I think it's important in academia, but I also think it's important in the other things that we do, being able to talk about why what we do matters to other people. Because if we can't do that, it doesn't matter what field we're in, then it's hard to make connections. It's hard to network if we're trying to network. And it's hard for us to help other people see what our value can be, and then for us to see other people's value as well.
That's such valuable advice. I mean, we always kind of laugh at the 30-second elevator pitch that they make you do at the beginning of a meeting, but I mean, it is so true, and it needs to be all-encompassing, and not just your 8 to 5 gig, but your why in general. So how have you felt as a young professional through all of this? How have you been coping? I mean, you're a pretty still new dad, working an essential job. What have you kind of been going through?
Well, I got a little placard to go in my car that says I'm an essential employee, so that's been exciting.
Feel good.
So it's been. I mean, look. I think we're all busy. I have a very busy job. It has only gotten busier, right? So I was. I think I got my first phone call this morning right before 7. I got off the phone last night about 10 o'clock. And it just ebbs and flows like that. It's kind of constant. And you juggle that with everything else. I mean, that's what we're all doing, right? We're trying to figure out how do we juggle our jobs with our family life and whatever kind of hobbies we may have these days. We did our 13-month-old was tested for COVID. He tested negative, thankfully. We were never really concerned, but it was kind of our doctor just in an abundance of caution, right? And the thing that was interesting or that was difficult about that was that we had to be quarantined with him for 10 days while we were waiting on the results. And yeah, I'm in the office today, but I'm working from home a lot. And basically nobody else is up here in the office. So I come in occasionally, but mostly I'm working from home. My wife is a pastor in town. She's working from home. And that's hard to do with two parents working from home with a 1-year-old, right? It's hard to do with kids of any age. But we have been very thankful that our daycare is still considered essential, has remained open. And so once he tested negative, he was able to go back to daycare. But it is that kind of juggling, right? How do we, spend time with him? How do we balance the work that each of us need to do while also not letting it kind of become completely overwhelming or consuming, which I think can be pretty easy in times like this.
I would agree. I'm like nodding along to all the kids stuff. I don't have kids. I'm there with you in spirit. I feel for you guys, but no, I don't have that situation, so I can't even imagine. Are you doing anything to kind of take the stress off? Have you picked up any quarantine stress relief methods? Or are you just trying to plug through until this is all over? I think that's what a lot of us are trying to do.
Well, so in my position, right, hurricanes are not uncommon, right? And we're kind of all in this community used to hurricanes. And early on, a lot of people were thinking about this kind of like we think about hurricanes. But the problem with that, of course, which we've all realized now, is that we can prepare for a hurricane. We know it's coming, it's going to hit, and then we clean up when we kind of get back. And this is not that, because this is, if it's like a hurricane, it's a slow moving hurricane that's going to take 12 months to go through our country or longer, right? And so I think it's really important that we kind of pace ourselves, so to speak, that we understand, think about this as a marathon and not a sprint. A lot of people have picked up new hobbies. I wish I had the time to do that. I haven't. So obviously I have other hobbies that I enjoy. I'm a big bourbon fan, so I do that, partake in that occasionally, not very often on the weeknights, but I think it's connecting with other people. It's been interesting while we've been physically separated. I think a lot of people have kind of craved connection and put more effort into connection. And so, a number of kind of virtual happy hours and things like that have been good, and connecting with people that, I wouldn't kind of typically day to day connect with. And so I think that's been good. And, just kind of getting to share a little bit, vent sometimes when you need to, and then kind of hear how things are going for others.
How's it going at the city? I know at the chamber, we're connecting in ways we never had before. There's just so much access to each other. We went from having one joint staff meeting a month to 30. We have one every day. So we're getting to know each other very well. Has anything shifted at the city? Do you see any change in communications or access for some of the lower level employees? I hate to say lower level, just in rank. I know there's just more access to some of our leaders at the chamber through all of this as young professionals. It's kind of knocked down all those barriers. Have you seen any shifts at the city?
There have been a lot of big shifts. So we have roughly 3,000 kind of permanent full-time employees, and we have about a third of those working remotely. We have a number of employees who can't work remotely. Obviously, our kind of first responders, police and fire, our utility workers. We have a number of them who actually have, since the beginning, been reverse quarantined in kind of rotation. So quarantining them on site at utility plants, at generation plants, so that we can ensure the continuity of the critical services, right? So there's been a lot of changes in that. We've moved our commission meetings virtually, which has been interesting. That just kind of changed how the public has interacted with us, which has, on one hand, made our meetings maybe go a little bit quicker, but on the other hand, certainly you feel maybe a little bit more disconnected. But I think people are kind of tuning in a way that they may not have before, because a lot of people are realizing they do have kind of more time on their hands. So, so all of the staff in the mayor's office is working remotely. And we talk with them regularly. About once a week, we kind of have a video, staff meeting, so to speak, which is different because I think to some degree maybe a little opposite for us. So we spend a lot of time out and about, but a lot of time in the office, and so we kind of have impromptu staff meetings, maybe a half a dozen times a day here. So it's been a little bit different, but it's been good. My kind of philosophy is, I hired you to do a job so that you can do it and not me. And I'm going to give you the space to do the job. And, I'm not going to look over your shoulder. I'm not going to, check in on you, a couple times a day to make sure that you're doing all of, everything on your task list or whatever. It's just kind of my management style. It's a little hands off. It's worked really well with our team. And so, I think that that's been good for them. Giving them some ability, some leeway to kind of be creative with some of the work that they're doing when we have time right now to do that. And that's one of the things that I think is kind of important that I've been thinking about is how do we use the time and the opportunities that we kind of find potentially before us now as we get through this, and then as we're thinking about kind of how what things are going to look like in the future.
Do y'all have any idea of what that might look like? Any projections?
No, that's a good question. I mean, I think in general, the change, everybody's making changes now, right? Drastic changes that companies and organizations have made overnight in most cases. I think the thing to remember is that these are oftentimes precedent-setting changes that we're making. And so we have to be strategic about that. So it may be that we kind of wanted time to do something we haven't had the time to do before, and now we have the bandwidth to do that. And so this is the time we can begin kind of trying new things that we've been wanting to try or implement new strategies. But I think it also means that we have to be careful about some of the things that we do that may not be sustainable in the future, but that if we begin doing them now may set the precedent where we kind of have to keep them going, right? And so how do we be strategic about that? What are the things that we want to see? And if there are things that we do want to change, now is a really good time to do that, right? If there are big changes that you want to make at work or in your organization or whatever, now is the time where everything is up in flux, right? Is up in the air to kind of try some of those new things out when I think the stakes are relatively low, right? I think everybody has kind of a lot of grace for what we're all dealing with, and that we're all kind of trying to figure out how to move forward in this kind of brave new world that we're in. And so, if it's customers that you're dealing with or members or colleagues, I think everybody kind of has a lot of grace. So I think now is a really good time to kind of try new things out.
I agree. And I think young professionals specifically are in a unique position to kind of come out of this on the other side even better than before. And I think this working remotely is what a lot of young professionals have been begging for, and now suddenly we're begging to get back out. But employers are going to have to realize that they can still do that work without being micromanaged, and they can have a little bit of a more flexible schedule. Do you see any other ways young professionals are positioned to kind of take the lead after all of this?
Well, I think the way I would answer that is, we should be looking at making changes now, right? Not waiting until we're kind of through this, so to speak, because I do, our planning horizon here at the city for this crisis is 8 to 12 months. Because we know that the fundamentals of the situation that we're in don't change until we have a vaccine or until we have really solid therapeutics. And any changes that happen before then are going to have to be done in concert with robust testing protocols and things like that. So we know that we're going to be in this situation for a long time, or relatively long time. So we shouldn't be waiting until kind of the other side of it. We should be doing those things now. And as I think about kind of this generation, and technically some of y'all may be in a younger generation than me. I think I'm one of the older millennials, which if you hear the kind of larger narrative these days, everybody that's under, I guess, 50 is a millennial, including like the elementary school students now. It's kind of not really, right, but that's how people talk, right? And so that's a little problematic. But I think about kind of our generation, we have names for different generations, the greatest generation and things like that. And I think about our generation as a resilient generation, right? So I was in high school when the September 11th attacks occurred. And then obviously the ensuing wars after that. We have gone through the Great Recession, kind of just as many of us were trying to get our career feet under us. We've been dealing, many of us in our generation, with astronomical student loan debt that nobody else before us has had to deal with. We've often dealt with really abysmal job prospects, but we've still kind of adapted through this, right? So I think that we've been a really resilient generation. And I think that has served us well and will continue to serve us well. And I think that those that are able to adapt during this time will not only survive, but that will be the ones that are positioned to kind of thrive on the other side. And I think that we're just particularly well suited to that because we haven't had a choice but to continuously adapt to really big crises kind of multiple times in our lives already.
Absolutely. I saw something on, just to completely water down everything you just said, on Instagram, that we've now seen two economic, like once in a lifetime economic disasters and recessions. And I mean, we obviously know how to get through them. I mean, some of us were in high school, some of us were in college or already started our careers, but we are kind of bred for it, so to speak.
Yeah.
Kind of come out on the other side. I want to open it up. Does anybody have any questions? I'm totally dominating the conversation. You can put them in the chat box or raise your virtual hand, or just raise your hand if you've got your video on. I'll take a second to let someone else have the floor if they want it. Thomas, what's the most challenging thing you faced through all of this? It can be a particular thing or just a general thing.
I mean, so I already talked about, my son being tested, and that wasn't, we were not really concerned about whether he had it or not. We did not at all during that time think that he had. It was very challenging to be quarantined for 10 days with a 1-year-old trying to work full time, for, both of us trying to work full time and balance that. So that was a challenge, and that's, a lot of people are going through that and don't have the luxury of sending their kid back to daycare when the test comes back negative. Other than that, I mean, I think that, this is a difficult time for a lot of people. Obviously I'm considered an essential employee, so I haven't had any, I don't have concerns about my job that a lot of people in our community do. Either they've already lost jobs or have the concern about, if this lasts another month, I may not have my job. So I'm kind of really blessed in that regard. And I feel, I mean, I love my job. I like the situation that I'm in, and I like being in a position to have some impact, however minor, on kind of how our community responds to this global crisis. And I will just say, by virtue of y'all being on this, y'all are obviously, I know a number of you're already plugged into the community, so you know what's going on. But I'll just tell you, Tallahassee has been a leader throughout this. We've been recognized nationally and internationally for some of the things that we've done and how we responded to this crisis. I've fielded emails and phone calls from people from all over the country, friends of mine and others that I didn't know before this, that are kind of asking about how we've done some of the things that we've done that have been really creative, for, the small business relief that we've offered, the nonprofit relief, the things that we have done through our utilities. We've been able to offer, some a little bit of relief to individuals and households, and so it's been good. Obviously, in my position, we like to be cheerleaders for Tallahassee, but it's nice to kind of have that reassurance when we're getting contacted from other communities to say, okay, how did y'all do what you did? And I just think that's something that as a community we should be proud of. It's easy to I think to some degree we are a victim of our own success here in Tallahassee, right? We do so many things so well that as a community we have really high standards, and I think that's a good thing. Whether it's environmental, whether it's from our elected leaders, whatever, we have very high standards. But I think it's good to be reminded every now and then kind of where we fall in relation to other cities. I mean, we're doing things that major cities in this country are doing, that nobody else kind of in our class of a mid-sized city is doing, or frankly has the ability to do. But we've been really forward thinking. We obviously have a utility that helps us from a financial standpoint, and we've been really forward thinking as a community through our Blueprint funding that has given us the flexibility to do some of those things.
Awesome. We've got a couple questions that came through in the chat box. Raphael asks, do you think there will be more relief efforts for local businesses at the local level? You mentioned the utility cut. Is there anything in the pipeline, since we are looking at this for an 8 to 12 month situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just real quick, in case you don't know, what we've done so far is we started with a $1 million grant program for small businesses, so 1 to 50 employees, and it was tiered based on employee size. We ended up going a little over $1 million, about 1.2, I think, with the number of companies that applied and were eligible by the deadline. So just straight grants for them. Well, then we came back with a kind of a round 2 of that for nonprofits, another $1 million. And so that's currently open, that nonprofits are eligible to apply for right now for a $2,500 grant. We do have a utility relief program, which allows individuals to defer their current month of a utility bill until the fall and pay it over a series of months. And with that, let me be clear, this is something that we do every day, no matter whether we're in a global pandemic or not. If you or anybody you know has trouble paying a utility bill, call us, and we're going to do absolutely everything we can in our power to help you. Because of certain state and federal guidelines, we cannot legally just waive bills. We don't have the ability to do that. But we exercise every bit of flexibility that we have. I will tell you, it is very hard in this community. If you're calling us, telling us what your situation is, it's difficult to get your utilities shut off because we want to do everything we can. We know how vital those services are. And then just this week, the commission approved passing on $6.3 million worth of fuel savings to every City of Tallahassee utility customer, so residential and commercial. So the average residential bill, you'll see about a $30 reduction. It's about 27% for the average residential bill on your May bill. Now, some people are saying, hey, that's good, but hey, like $30, I'm okay. I don't have any employment concerns. Can I help other people out with that? And we have a program that we've had in place for a long time called Project Share that is run, so we can put money in a fund that's run by a separate nonprofit here in town, so that we're separated from it, right? And it's completely legitimate. That helps people pay utility bills if they have an issue with that. So I think the majority of the commission is doing that. I know that that's what we're doing in my household, is donating our whatever our reduction ends up being. And we have a 1-year-old, and we're getting floors done in our house right now, so we're drawing a lot of extra power, and I think our power bill, I know, is higher than the average, but we know that other people can use that a lot more than we can. So with the relief that we've done, or at the local relief that we've been positioned to do, we have said since the beginning that in a global, my light keeps turning off because I'm not moving. In a global pandemic, the vast majority of the relief is going to have to come from the states and the feds, right? We just don't have the capacity to do that, but we do believe that we have some role to play locally, and that was really important to the mayor. He was the one that came out early, the first one to say, hey, we need to have an emergency meeting of the intergovernmental agency to talk about a local relief package. So I won't rule that out by any means. The idea with the packages that we've done so far is that they would be what we called like a bridge to a bridge. Because we have we kind of have cash we can get in companies' hands very, very quickly to help them, bridge them to these state and federal resources, whether it's the PPP loan, which is, I think, a really great thing that they've offered at the federal level, and they've just put more money in that for businesses, or whether it's an emergency bridge loan from the state or something like that. So the answer is, I don't know. I can tell you, there are not, that I'm aware of, active conversations about another round of local relief, local assistance for businesses. But that could change in the future. We do anticipate this being long-term, but we recognize that we can only do so much. And when we have a nearly $1 billion budget at the city, which is a lot of money, for sure. But we have to balance our budget. We spend all that money every year on our services. And we're looking at this fiscal year, which we're over halfway through this fiscal year, potentially a $50 million hit to our budget. And that's, even in a $1 billion budget, it's hard to figure out how you cut $50 million, right? And so we're trying to look at all of these things, and we're also trying to determine what things will look like in the next fiscal year if this continues on. And this is what this is just maybe a different scale, but it's what every company and organization, it's what households are looking at too, right? Is what's my situation now, and then how am I going to feel about that in 8 months? And those could be pretty different. But that's a good question.
Thank you. So that was a very comprehensive answer. I like that. What's the name of the utility relief thing again, if you can donate
Project Share. So we have two. So you may have heard of Change for Change, and Change for Change, I think, came out of a Leadership Tallahassee class. The idea was kind of round your bill up to the next dollar, and all of the Change for Change funds go to support efforts for those who are experiencing homelessness. With that, a lot of people call and say, hey, put $5 a month on my bill for Change for Change. You can do the same thing with Project Share. You can say, hey, I want to donate $5 a month to Project Share, or I just want to make a one-time donation. And so you can look at those, both of those on our website. And then if you want to say, hey, I want to donate my utility reduction, the thing is, you won't, until your May bill gets produced, it's not going to be clear what the amount is, because it's a little complicated, but basically the rate per kilowatt hour is reduced for the month of May. So, so you won't exactly know, but you may say, hey, if it's going to be about $30, I'll just call and donate $30 to Project Share, right? But, one of the things that we're hoping comes out of this is obviously a lot of people that don't need it donate it for those who do. And then we're kind of raise awareness of these programs so that people may say, hey, I'm not going to miss $5 or $10 a month on my utility bill. And, if we're a lot of us are doing that, then we'll kind of reinvigorate this Project Share, which has been around for years now.
And I never knew about it. I put it in the chat box, the two names of those for y'all that want to look it up later. And we'll put the link on the Access website too. Sarah asks, what do relief and reopen efforts look like in the city so far? Do you have any insight on what the next month or two might look like for Tallahassee residents?
My expectation is it probably largely looks like where we are now. So the White House and the CDC have issued, their guidelines on, what they're talking about is kind of reopening the country, and they're actually really strong guidelines that have gating criteria, and it's a phased approach, and you have to have 14 days of decreases in hospitalizations of people with flu-like and COVID-like symptoms, and decreases in confirmed cases, and you have to have your hospital is able to provide care, not in a state of crisis care, and you have to have robust testing, particularly for emergency healthcare workers, which would include antibody testing. And now, I'll be honest, we don't have a lot of confidence right now in some of the antibody testing. There's only 4. I think there's tons and tons out there. There's only 4 that have been granted an emergency use authorization by the FDA. And by their nature, the kind of blood antibody tests are going to be less accurate than the tests that they're doing for COVID when they're swabbing back in your way back in your nose or in your throat. But there's been some issues with the antibody testing. So by the criteria the White House and the CDC have put out, the phased approach is probably the right way to think about it. But phase 1 that they've written in there, and nobody would in theory be in phase 1 right now, looks a lot like the situation that we're in now. And then you have to be kind of, have a successful 14 days meeting all those gating criteria before you can move to phase 2. And then if you have, a spike, then you've got to go back a phase or whatever. So, the governor's got a committee that he's put together, and actually the mayor is going to be participating on a call with that committee this morning to give a local government perspective. And they're going to be talking about kind of how do we think about this as a state. And that can look different in different parts of the state. I would imagine, we're experiencing this differently here in Tallahassee than say Miami is in raw numbers, but we also have a different situation because we're surrounded by rural counties. There's a large outbreak in South Georgia, which is just north of us. That affects our hospital census a little bit. We're watching some troubling trends over in Gadsden County right now, which will affect us potentially in kind of what the outbreak is in Leon County, but also in the hospitalizations here because our hospitals serve regionally. And so I would like to be more optimistic about where we'll be. But I think that, like I said, we'll largely be in this posture until we have either really good therapeutics or until we have a vaccine. And that's not good to think about. And I think that we could imagine that we go through a series of gradual kind of loosening and then tightening of things based on what the situation is here. I will say that currently we have 191 cases in Tallahassee. We've had 2 deaths and we've had 29 hospitalizations. So the hospitalizations number that's being reported by the state, I'm pretty sure is underreported right now. But we've been relatively lucky here in Tallahassee. And we also took early steps as a community. The city did, the hospitals did, the community as a whole took early steps, which I think have paid off. And so we've done well. But what we don't want to happen is to say either A, this means we overreacted because it didn't get as bad as some models predicted. Because what this tells us is that what we've done has worked. And then B, we don't want to let our guard down. Which I think is really easy to do because we're all getting stir crazy. We want people to go back to work. We want the economy to start kind of gearing up again. But one of the things that we're concerned about is if we try to say open up too soon and it backfires, then I think the long-term pain is much worse than if we just take it slower.
Absolutely, and that transitions so beautifully into what Samantha just asked in the chat, that a lot of experts are forecasting a second round of this even after we all open up the right way. So is the city preparing for that worst case scenario?
We've been in conversations with the hospitals regularly. The mayor and I, both together and individually, we talk to the CEOs of both our hospitals here on almost a daily basis. We're talking with colleagues over at FSU, they're doing a really good job with their response. I've had a number of conversations with folks from the Mayo Clinic. And so we're kind of planning for this. We're looking at the national to state data, but we're also looking at the local data because that's what really matters for us. They're here locally in Tallahassee, Leon County, but also regionally because